Have you ever stopped to think about why the whole world can't take its eyes off Israel? Why every bomb that falls on Tel Aviv becomes a global headline, while entire wars on other continents barely make the news? The answer may be written more than 2,500 years ago in prophecies that are unfolding now, at this very moment, as you read these words. We are not talking about vague symbolism or forced interpretations. We are talking about concrete, measurable events that can be verified by satellite, documented in international treaties, and photographed by any tourist walking the streets of Jerusalem. What you are about to discover is not a conspiracy theory. It is the frightening convergence between ancient texts and current geopolitical reality. And if you understand that Israel is the pointer of God's clock, subscribe now and leave your comment with the phrase, "I am watching." Let's begin with something that should be impossible. In October 2023, while the world watched in horror the Hamas attacks, something went unnoticed by most analysts. Israel today possesses the capacity to feed its own population with the agricultural production of the Negev desert. We are not talking about small experimental gardens. We are talking about a desert that covers 60% of Israeli territory and that now exports tomatoes, peppers, and flowers to Europe. The prophet Isaiah wrote in chapter 35 that the desert would rejoice and blossom like the narcissus, that waters would burst forth in the desert and streams in the wilderness. When these words were written, approximately 700 years before Christ, Israel was a fertile land. The prophecy made no sense in that context. But it makes perfect sense today, after centuries of Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Crusader, Ottoman, and British domination that transformed the region into an arid and forgotten land. Mark Twain visited Palestine in 1867 and described a desolate land, without trees, without water, practically uninhabitable. Today, Israel has more trees than it did in 1948. Drip irrigation technology, invented by Israeli engineer Simcha Blas, has transformed barren sands into productive fields. But here's the detail that few realize. This transformation is not just an achievement of human engineering. Ezekiel prophesied in chapter 36, verse 8, that the mountains of Israel would produce branches and bear fruit for the people, because they are about to come. The Hebrew word used for about to come indicates imminence, urgency. Agriculture would not only be restored, it would be the sign that the prophetic clock was about to tick. But let's jump to something that's happening right now. In NATO meeting rooms, Kremlin offices, and the palaces of Ankara and Tehran, an alliance is forming that should give any scholar of Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 sleepless nights. The prophecy of Gog and Magog describes a coalition of nations that will come against Israel, like a cloud covering the land in the last days. The names are ancient: Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Togarmah. For centuries, theologians have debated the identity of these peoples. Today, most scholars agree. Magog represents the region of ancient Scythia, which corresponds to modern Russia and former Soviet republics. Meshech and Tubal are associated with Turkey. Persia is Iran, which retained that name until 1935. Cush is identified with Ethiopia and Sudan, and Put with Libya. Now consider what is happening on the current geopolitical chessboard. Russia, Turkey, and Iran, three nations that historically have never been natural allies, are now coordinating military actions in Syria, sharing intelligence, and conducting joint military exercises. Russia supplies S-400 anti-aircraft defense systems to NATO member Turkey, creating an unprecedented situation. Iran maintains military proxies in Lebanon, through Hezbollah, in Syria, and in Gaza. Libya is fragmented between factions supported by Turkey and Russia. Sudan has undergone regime changes that have brought it closer to radical Islamic alliances. All the players are on the board, exactly as Ezekiel predicted 2,600 years ago. And there is a crucial detail in the prophecy that few notice. Ezekiel says that this coalition will come to take the spoil and to seize the prey in Ezekiel 38, verse 12. It is not merely theological hatred, it is greed. What does Israel possess that is worth this unlikely alliance risking a war for? The answer lies 1,600 meters below the Mediterranean seabed. In 2009, Israel discovered the Tamar natural gas field with estimated reserves of 317 billion cubic meters. A year later, Leviathan, even larger, was discovered, with 620 billion cubic meters. These discoveries transformed Israel from an energy importer to a potential exporter. But it doesn't stop there. Recent geological studies indicate the possibility of vast oil reserves in the Golan Heights region and in areas not yet fully explored. The prophecy of Moses in Deuteronomy 33, verse 19, says that Zebulun and Issachar, tribes whose territories correspond to northern Israel, would suck up the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand. When it was written, this made no economic sense. Today, it makes perfect sense. Israel has signed gas export agreements with Egypt and Jordan and is negotiating with Europe, which is desperately seeking alternatives to Russian gas. The EastMed pipeline, which would link Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Italy, is a direct threat to Russian energy interests and Turkish ambitions to become the energy hub between Asia and Europe. Suddenly, Ezekiel's prophecy about taking the spoils takes on precise economic contours. This is not prophetic paranoia, but an analysis of strategic resources. Israel possesses desalinated water, agricultural technology, military capacity disproportionate to its size, and now energy. It is the perfect prey for a hungry coalition. But let's step back again, because there is another prophecy being fulfilled that most people are not paying attention to. Isaiah wrote in chapter 11, verses 11 and 12, that the Lord would again reach out his hand to rescue the remnant of his people who remained in Assyria, in Egypt, in Pathros, in Ethiopia, in Elam, in Shinar, in Hamath, and in the lands of the sea, and would raise a banner for the nations, and would gather the exiles of Israel and the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. For centuries, this prophecy seemed fulfilled with the return from the Babylonian exile. But that was only a partial return from a specific region. What Isaiah described is global, from the four corners of the earth. Between 1882 and 1948, waves of Jewish immigration began to arrive in Palestine from Russia, Poland, Germany, and Yemen. After 1948, with the founding of the State of Israel, massive operations like Magic Carpet brought 50,000 Jews from Yemen. Operation Ezra and Nehemiah brought 130,000 Jews from Iraq, and Operation Moses and Operation Solomon rescued over 20,000 Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel or Falashas. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, 1 million Russian Jews immigrated to Israel. But what is happening now is even more impressive. In the last 5 years, isolated Jewish communities are being discovered or rediscovered in forgotten places around the world. Bnei Menashe from India and Myanmar, who claim descent from the lost tribe of Manasseh, are being brought to Israel. Communities in Peru, Zimbabwe, and Uganda, which practice Jewish customs preserved for centuries, are being recognized and, in some cases, immigrated. DNA testing technology has made it possible to trace genetic markers that connect these communities to ancient Israel. This is not biblical romanticism. It is forensic genetics applied to prophecy. And there's more. Jeremiah prophesied in chapter 16, verses 14 and 15, that the day would come when it would no longer be said, "As the Lord lives, who brought the children of Israel up out of the land of Egypt," but rather, "As the Lord lives, who brought the children of Israel up out of the land of the north and out of all the lands where he had driven them." The land of the north has always been interpreted as Babylon, but in Hebrew, Eretz Tzafon can mean the lands of the far north. The largest wave of immigration in the last 30 years came from Russia and Ukraine, directly from the north. The prophecy is so literal that it is disturbing. Now, let me take you to the most contested place on the planet. 35 acres in the heart of Jerusalem, known as the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif to Muslims. There, according to Jewish tradition, stood the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant rested and where the presence of God dwelt in tangible form. The Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, exactly as Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24, verse 2, that not one stone would be left upon another. For 2,000 years, Jews prayed facing that mount, repeating at Passover, "Next year in Jerusalem rebuilt." It seemed impossible. After 1967, when Israel recaptured Jerusalem in the Six-Day War, the world expected them to rebuild the temple immediately. But General Moshe Dayan made a surprising decision. He returned the administration of the mount to the Islamic Waqf, allowing the mosques to remain. Why? Because rebuilding the temple would mean a global religious war. Today, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, stand there. Any attempt to physically alter that site could unite 1.5 billion Muslims against Israel. But the prophecy is clear. There will be a third temple. Daniel speaks in chapter 9, verse 27, about a prince who will put an end to sacrifice and offering, implying that sacrifices will have been restored. Paul, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, mentions that the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God, presenting himself as if he were God. John, in Revelation 11, verses 1 and 2, is ordered to measure the temple and the altar, but not the outer court, which was given to the Gentiles. So, how to resolve the geopolitical impasse? Here's where it gets fascinating. Today, in Israel, there are several organizations dedicated to the reconstruction of the temple. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has already reconstructed more than 60 of the 103 utensils necessary for the temple service, using the exact specifications of Exodus and Leviticus. They created the priestly garments, the altar of incense, the table of showbread, the menorah of pure gold, all according to biblical measurements. They created a register of Kohanim, descendants of the priestly lineage of Aaron, confirmed by specific genetic markers, and are training them in the temple rituals. They imported red heifers from the United States, seeking specimens that meet the requirements of Numbers 19 for the purification ritual necessary before any priest can serve in the temple. In March 2024, the Institute announced that it currently possesses 5 qualified red heifers. It may seem like an irrelevant detail, but for Orthodox Jews and scholars of prophecy, it is a ticking clock. There are serious architectural discussions about how the temple could be built without touching Islamic structures. Some proposals suggest that the original Holy of Holies was located north of the Dome of the Rock, not beneath it, allowing for the coexistence of the 3 holy sites. Ground-penetrating radar studies and precise measurements based on texts by Josephus and the Talmudic tractate Mido support this possibility. But there is a more likely path, a peace agreement involving the partitioning of the Temple Mount, something unthinkable 20 years ago, but which is beginning to be whispered in diplomatic circles. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020 between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, later expanded to Morocco and Sudan, created a historical precedent, Arab nations normalizing relations with Israel without first resolving the Palestinian issue. And Saudi Arabia is negotiating. If the Saudis, guardians of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, normalize with Israel, it will change the game, and it could open the way for an agreement on Jerusalem that today seems impossible. Daniel 9:27 speaks of a leader who will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he will put an end to the sacrifice. This covenant is interpreted as a 7-year peace treaty. We are seeing the stage being set. If you are beginning to see how these pieces fit together, leave your comment. I am watching. Now I need to talk about something that defies all military logic and has perplexed Pentagon generals for decades. Israel shouldn't exist. I'll be blunt. A country the size of the state of Sergipe, with 9 million inhabitants, surrounded by 22 Arab countries with 350 million people, which has faced 5 wars of extermination since 1948, simply shouldn't be here. The War of Independence of 1948 pitted Israel, with 650,000 Jews, mostly Holocaust survivors, against the combined armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. British military experts gave Israel 2 weeks to survive. Israel not only survived, but expanded its territory by 20% beyond the borders proposed by the UN. In the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel faced a coalition of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, destroying 400 Arab aircraft, most of them still on the ground, in a surgical preemptive strike on the morning of June 5th, and in 6 days conquered the Sinai, Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. It was the fastest and most disproportionate war in modern military history. Then, in 1973, in the Yom Kippur War, Israel was caught by surprise on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Syria attacked from the north with 1,400 tanks. Egypt crossed the Suez Canal with 2,000 tanks and 200,000 soldiers. In the first 3 days, Israel lost a third of its air force and seemed on the verge of destruction. Prime Minister Golda Meir authorized the preparation of nuclear weapons as a last resort. But then the tide turned. Against all odds, Israel not only repelled the attacks, but advanced as far as 40 kilometers from Damascus and surrounded the Egyptian Third Army in the Sinai. Henry Kissinger, then U.S. Secretary of State, described it as a military miracle. In 1981, Israel destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor Osirak in an operation 100 kilometers away, flying below radar through hostile airspace. In 2007, it repeated the feat, destroying a Syrian nuclear reactor. In October 2023, Hamas launched the largest attack against Israel since Yom Kippur, killing 1,200 civilians and taking 250 hostages. The Israeli military response was immediate, and despite the national trauma, the country did not collapse. Now, how to explain this militarily? Israel has technology, intelligence, a superior air force, the Iron Dome anti-missile system that intercepts more than 90% of projectiles. But this does not explain 1948, when there was no technology, no organized army, and no international support. President Truman imposed an arms embargo, and Great Britain supplied weapons to the Arabs. The Orthodox rabbis of the time declared that Israel's survival was Yad Hashem, the hand of God. And biblical texts support this. Zechariah chapter 2 verse 5 says that God will be a wall of fire around Jerusalem. Isaiah chapter 62 verses 6 and 7 speaks of guards on the walls of Jerusalem who will never be silent. Ezekiel in chapter 38 verses 18 to 23 describes how God himself will fight against the invaders of Israel. Earthquake, sword against sword, torrential rain, hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Some scholars interpret these apocalyptic descriptions as metaphors for natural phenomena and military confusion. And there are strange historical episodes. In the War of Independence, a sudden fog covered Israeli convoys at critical moments, hiding them from Arab artillery. In the Six-Day War, Syrian soldiers abandoned fortified positions in inexplicable panic. Reports from Egyptian pilots mention electronic interference that couldn't have been Israeli because Israel didn't have that technology in 1967. You can call it strategic luck, you can call it operational superiority. But when the same country survives 67 assassination attempts in 76 years, academics start using words like statistical anomaly. And perhaps that's what the prophecy is describing. A protection that defies human calculations because it serves a purpose beyond conventional geopolitics. But let's get to the most controversial and personal point of all these prophecies: the recognition of the Messiah. Zechariah, chapter 12, verse 10, contains one of the most specific and unsettling prophecies in the Old Testament. It says, And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son." This prophecy speaks of a collective national recognition of someone who has been pierced. The Hebrew verb dakar means to pierce with a spear or nail. For centuries, Jewish rabbis debated this passage. Some applied it to Messiah ben Joseph, a figure who would suffer and die before the coming of the victorious Messiah ben David. Others tried to apply it to national martyrs. But the connection to the crucifixion of Jesus is inescapable for anyone studying the New Testament. John, in chapter 19, verse 37, quotes this very prophecy when describing the Roman soldier piercing Jesus' side on the cross. Today, the vast majority of Israeli Jews do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Mainstream Judaism sees him as a dissenting rabbi, possibly a false Messiah. But something is changing. In the last 2 decades, the Messianic Jewish movement in Israel has grown from a few hundred to an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 people, depending on the definition. There are now more than 300 Messianic congregations in Israel. For the first time in modern history, there are Israeli Jews who serve in the army, speak Hebrew, live in kibbutzim, and believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They are not Gentile Christians. They are Jews by birth who maintain a Jewish identity while confessing Yeshua. And there is an even more intriguing phenomenon. Survivors of terrorist attacks, soldiers who have had near-death experiences in combat, are reporting visionary experiences involving a figure they identify as the Messiah. Documentaries like I Met Messiah have recorded dozens of these testimonies. Critics say it's disguised proselytism, post-combat trauma, or a search for meaning amidst suffering. But the pattern is remarkable. People who have never opened the New Testament, raised in secular or Orthodox families, describing similar experiences. Zechariah's prophecy suggests that this recognition will not be gradual, but sudden and collective. Romans, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26, speaks of a partial hardening that has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, and so all Israel will be saved. Paul is quoting Isaiah 59:20, which says, "And a Redeemer will come to Zion, to those in Jacob who turn from transgression." The timing is specific, when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. We are seeing explosive growth of Christianity in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. India may have 200 million Christians by 2050. China has the largest Christian population in the world, albeit suppressed. Africa already has 600 million Christians. When this wave of Gentile conversions is complete, if the scriptures are correct, something will change in Israel. And it may be connected to the apocalyptic events described in Zechariah 14 and Revelation 19, when the Messiah returns visibly, not as the humble carpenter of Nazareth, but as the conquering king. At that moment, according to prophecy, every eye will see him, and specifically those who pierced him will recognize him. This prompts an uncomfortable question. What if Jewish resistance to Christianity for 2,000 years, despite unimaginable persecutions, inquisitions, pogroms, and the Holocaust, was not stubbornness, but prophetic fulfillment? What if it was necessary for Israel to temporarily reject Jesus so that the gospel could reach the ends of the earth, as Paul suggests in Romans 11, so that in the end the circle closes with the return of the Messiah recognized by his own people? I am not defending replacement theology, which teaches that the church has replaced Israel. On the contrary, Paul is emphatic, God has not rejected his people. Israel has a prophetic destiny distinct from and complementary to that of the church. The promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are irrevocable. And this brings us to the final picture. What does all this mean for an outsider? You may be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, agnostic, or atheist. But you cannot deny that there is a statistically improbable concentration of historical, archaeological, geopolitical, and social events converging on a piece of land the size of Sergipe in the Middle East, the desert flourishing against all climatic logic. A language dead for 2,000 years, resurrected and now spoken by 9 million people. A people scattered across 70 nations, returning by plane from the four corners of the earth. An improbable military alliance between Russia, Turkey, and Iran, forming exactly what Ezekiel described. Discovered energy resources attracting global covetousness. Serious discussions about rebuilding a temple on a site that was literally plowed by the Romans in 135 AD. Military survival that defies all strategic calculations, and a growing, still minority but undeniable, recognition of the Messiah among the Jewish people themselves. If only one of these things happened, it would be a coincidence. 2 would be interesting. 3, you start paying attention. But all 7 happening simultaneously, in the same generation, that's what statisticians call significance. But here's what most people don't understand about biblical prophecy. It wasn't written to satisfy curiosity about the future. It was written to provoke a response in the present. When Jesus rebuked the Pharisees in Matthew 16:2-3 for knowing how to discern the appearance of the sky, but not the signs of the times, it wasn't because he wanted to impress them with prescience. It was because the signs should have provoked repentance, preparation, and a realignment of priorities. The prophecies about Israel are not eschatological entertainment. They are a clock pointing to the urgency of personal decision. If God is moving nations like chess pieces, making deserts bloom, bringing exiles back, preserving a people against repeated genocides, protecting a nation the size of Sergipe from coalitions that should have wiped it off the map, preparing the stage for the visible return of the Messiah to the Mount of Olives as described in Zechariah 14:4, then every person needs to ask the question that the Jews have been asking for millennia. Ma nishtana? Why is this night different from all other nights? Why is this moment different? What if we are truly living in the generation that will see the fulfillment of these things? Jerusalem is the only city about which the scriptures explicitly command prayer. Psalm 122, verse 6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, may those who love you prosper. Why? Because Jerusalem is the prophetic epicenter. It is where it all began, with Abraham offering Isaac on Mount Moriah. It is where David established the capital, where Solomon built the temple, where Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel prophesied, where Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected, where the apostles received the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and where, according to Revelation 21, the New Jerusalem will descend from heaven. The 4,000-year-old city where 3 religions claim rights, where Jews pray at the Western Wall, Muslims at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Christians at the Holy Sepulchre, separated by meters but divided by theologies, is the point of convergence of human destiny. Not by geographical accident, but by divine design. And the peace of Jerusalem for which we are called to pray is not the absence of conflict. The Hebrew word shalom means completeness, restoration, everything in its right place. The peace of Jerusalem will only come when the Prince of Peace assumes the throne of David, as Isaiah 9, 6, and 7 say. Until then, Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling for the nations, as Zechariah 12:2 prophesies. It will be the point of conflict because it is the point of decision. If you understand that Israel is the pointer of God's clock, subscribe and leave your comment with the phrase, "I am watching." Because vigilance is the posture that Jesus repeatedly commanded. Watch, for you do not know when the Lord is coming. The prophecies that are being fulfilled before our eyes are not meant to generate panic but readiness, not fear but preparation, not speculation about dates but examination of life. Because when the clock strikes the final hour, when these 7 prophecies and dozens of others converge in the event that Paul called the blessed hope, your denomination, your rapture theology, your 1,000-year interpretation will not matter. Only one question will matter. Have you recognized the Messiah? That is the only prophecy that truly matters. Not the blossoming in the desert, not the alliance of nations, not the rebuilt temple, not supernatural military protection, but the personal, individual recognition of the pierced one as Lord and Savior. Because all other prophecies converge on this one. Israel is at the center of God's clock, not because the Jews are superior, but because God chose to make Abraham the father of many nations and Jerusalem the stage where the drama of human redemption would unfold. And this drama is reaching its final act. The sets are in place, the actors are in position, the lights are coming on. The question remains, are you watching from the outside, or do you recognize that you are part of the story? Because these prophecies are not about them, they are about us, regarding all of humanity being forced to confront the question Pilate asked 2,000 years ago, a question that continues to echo. What shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? The clock is ticking. The prophecies are being fulfilled. And each tick-tock is an invitation to vigilance, to preparation, and to the decision that will define not only the future of Israel, but the eternal destiny of every soul that hears and responds.